message today is actually going to be dealing with endurance. So you didn't realize that we've had an amazing time of worship and you're still going to get a full word. It's going to be an enduring moment. So no, I'll try and go quicker rather than slower. So if you got your Bibles, if you can turn to Matthew 15, verse 21. You know, this last week we've celebrated Women's Day. And what I love about Jesus is you always see that he doesn't fit into the social norms of the day. He doesn't get caught up into the debates that are going on. But he lives in such a way that it's countercultural to what's happening around him. And he shifts things, even in the way that he dealt with hot topics such as women. He treated them with dignity and honor. Even the way that he treated lepers and the outcast and the demonized and the tax collectors. There was something about him that he came full of grace and truth. And it was modeled beautifully in the way that he interacted with people. But here we have a passage that seems a little bit different, especially after, as I've said, Women's Day. Let's read from Matthew 15, verse 21. It speaks about the faith of a Canaanite woman. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. Other versions say he kept silent. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." And he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. And he replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your desire is granted," or your request is granted in the NIV. And her daughter was healed at that very moment. It's an amazing passage. And when you read this, we need to realize that Jesus is a master teacher. Because when you read it, you can think, well, that's a little bit rude. That's a little bit callous. That's a little bit not like the Jesus that I know. Yet there's something in here that's revealing a deeper thing that I trust that we're going to see as we go through this, because Jesus is the greatest teacher that has ever lived. And in this passage, there's something of that brilliance that shines through when we realize that there are things that characterize a great teacher, and we're going to see them at work in this passage. Here are some things that reveal a great teacher. A great teacher aims not just at dispensing information, but he looks at seeing lives changed. A great teacher doesn't just give lectures, but he creates experiences for people to encounter. A great teacher knows that the truth is most powerful when people have to work to discover it. He knows that truth discovered has a much deeper impact than truth that's presented. What that means is I can speak to you 20, 30, 40 times on a topic, Rich another 70, John another 80, and it might just come to you and wash over you. But if you go and spend a bit of time with the Lord and open up your Bibles and you discover that same thing that we've said, but you discover it for yourself, it's like the heavens have been rent open. It's like the angels are singing. It's like God is speaking directly to you, and your whole life is transformed and changed at that moment. Why? Because you discovered something in relationship with God. That's how powerful it is when those moments come. Proverbs 25, verse 2 said, "It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search it out." It's saying that God conceals things for us, not from us, but we've got to search it out. And Jesus, as a master teacher, is creating these moments for things to be discovered in relationship with God. A master teacher teaches more than just one person or one group at a time, and he teaches on multiple levels. So even as I'm sharing, we know that the master teacher is sharing, not me. And in that, there are multiple levels of what's going on. So things I'm not even saying, you might be hearing as the Spirit of God ministers to you. A master teacher's methods are not always clear to the students at the time. It means if you leave this auditorium today and you don't understand what I've said, it's because I'm a master teacher and it'll eventually sink in. He's the master teacher, not me. But Jesus was an expert at this, at teaching. And theologians called the way that he would often teach, they called it this: deliberately induced frustration. Will you say that with me? Deliberately induced frustration. It's when he tells the crowd to go out and feed the thousands, and yet they've got no food. It's when he sends them out to deliver someone from demons, but he hasn't yet told them that comes out with prayer and fasting. It's when he tells them to go and get in the boat because they're going to the other side, but he doesn't tell them that the mother of all storms is heading towards them as they head out on the waters. There's a little bit of what we call deliberately induced frustration, and master teachers use this powerfully. I've actually fully adopted it as my parenting style. My daughter's listening to me. Where a master teacher will always test and probe to see where you are on that learning curve. And it's that testing that I'm talking about. It's to prove and improve you in your faith and your journey with Him. It's never to destroy you. It's that picture of my life like a ship being in a harbor, and I know the Lord's called me out the safety of the harbor to adventure with Him, but there's an enemy who wants to shipwreck me, but I know that the Lord is calling me out because He wants to prove me seaworthy no matter what comes at me. And so it's that sort of testing. It's to prove and it's to improve, to allow us to grow, to come into the fullness of what He has for us. And so this is what we see with Jesus. And Ken Bailey, who is an amazing author, I think he's passed away now, he wrote Jesus through Middle Eastern eyes and Paul through Middle Eastern eyes, talking a little bit similarly to what Greg will be in the culture and context of the day. He said this passage is so key in seeing that there is a test given to two different types of people. We're going to see one where the disciples are having this test of the capacity of their love, and this Canaanite woman is being tested in her endurance. And so are you this morning, as we might go a little bit over time. But the beauty is this. You see that coming into this moment, the chapter before, it says that the disciples had little faith. It ends off this passage speaking about great faith, and we'll see the journey in between. I do want to tell a little story that I enjoyed sharing on tests. It was of a student at a large university in a large class, and he had been studying, and he had heard that his professor was incredibly rigorous in the way that he tested. And so he'd been studying. He felt prepared and ready to go, and he had been studying ornithology, the study of birds. Anyway, he walked into the test, the exam room, and the exam room was set up with 25 pictures of different types of birds' feet along the walls. Now, he could identify birds by their marks, by their wings, by their beaks, whatever it else might be, but feet wasn't his highest priority in it. And so there was frustration in this student, and he said, "This is crazy. No one could take this test." And the teacher said, "Nevertheless, you still have to." He responded, "Well, I'm not going to take it." And the lecturer said, "Well, you have to take it or you fail." The student said, "Well, go ahead, fail me, I'm not going to take it." The teacher said, "All right, that's it, you failed me, tell me your name." And the kid rolled up his pants to his knees and he says, "You tell me." We don't all respond very well to tests that come our way. But what we see here, and it's a quote by Mike Bickle, I know others have mentioned it as well, but God will, and it's a quote, not a scripture, but it reveals something to us. God will sometimes offend our mind to reveal our heart. That religiosity, that rigidness of thinking, that box theology where we try to box God, and He'll sometimes offend our minds to reveal our heart. But He'll never contradict His word. He might shift our understanding of it. This is what He does. So Jesus teaches His disciples and this Canaanite woman, and He's testing them in various areas. This encounter with Jesus is something that's going to reveal something to them. And Jesus has gone to this place where He's wanting rest. That's Tyre and Sidon. He's gone there. It's a place where the people there were despised by the Israelites. Actually, there was a Jewish historian, his name was Josephus, and he was writing roughly about the time of Jesus, very historically, and he said the people of Tyre and Sidon are the most bitter of enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites felt that towards them. And so this woman coming to Jesus, she would have been regarded by the disciples as an enemy and a member of a spiritually degraded people that they didn't want to have contact with. But here in Matthew 15, she comes with this traditional cry of a beggar, and she cries out to Jesus, "Have mercy on me." She's humbled herself. She even adds the word Lord to it. "Have mercy on me, Lord." And then she goes on to say, "Son of David." So she's recognizing who He is. That Son of David had messianic overtones. It means that she recognizes and probably has better insight into who Jesus is than many of the Israelites of the day. And so she calls out to Jesus and says this. So He's walking, He's with the disciples. She comes out and she calls out, like you've seen lepers doing, blind people doing, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." And here's Jesus' response, and this is where it jars us a little bit. In verse 23, it says that Jesus did not answer a word. In other versions, it says Jesus was silent. So he's walking, the disciples are with him, they're going to this place to rest. This lady comes out, crying out for mercy, and Jesus basically ignores her. This woman is suffering terribly. She's appealing to Jesus on behalf of her daughter that is being demonized and agonized. And it seems that out of that humility and that reverence in coming to Jesus, he acts like he doesn't hear her, with silence, indifference, and a bit of rejection. The amazing thing is Matthew doesn't try to hide this in writing this. He doesn't try to just skirt over it, but he actually focuses on it because he realizes that there's something here that we need to catch of who Jesus is in his heart and what he's wanting to reveal in this moment. Now, the woman could have walked away at this point. She was able to do that because based on how Jesus had just been silent and ignored her. How many of us are hamstrung in our faith, maybe not even hamstrung, but how many of us walk away because we just feel that Jesus hasn't responded to things we've been asking? Maybe our faith doesn't even get past that first moment of proving, and there's no allowance for it to improve. Where do you find yourself on that journey? So she's being tested in this moment, but there's something in her heart that she wants to see her daughter healed, and she is saying, I'm going to trust this man and what I've heard about him because I've got a need and I've heard that he is the one that can meet needs. And so she's not turned away by the silence. The silence doesn't scare her. She's ready to push through that thing. There's something of endurance at work in her life. But even as she's being tested in this way, so are the disciples going through their own, in a sense, examination. Here's what happens with the disciples. They're not surprised by the way Jesus acts. They're not surprised that he doesn't talk to this woman because they know what a rabbi is meant to do. In the culture and context of the day, a rabbi wasn't meant to engage with women just on the streets approaching him like this. They never had that place in society. Actually, there was an ancient rabbinic saying that said this. Forgive me, ladies, for reading it. He that talks with womankind brings evil on himself. He neglects the study of the law, and at the last he will inherit Gehenna, that is hell. I mean, that makes Trump seems like he's living politically correct in what he says. I mean, he would be like a choir boy in this instant. So the disciples are not surprised that Jesus is speaking like this. And Jesus deliberately ignores this woman. He does it on purpose, and while he ignores her, he's watching the disciples. He's got his eyes on the disciples to see what they'll do. He's asking and he's wondering in himself, do they understand that my heart is for everybody? Do they understand that my heart is for the Gentiles? That my heart is for women? That my heart is for the marginalized, the outcast, the despised of society? He's watching them. Do they understand what I'm about and what I'm called to? Their response comes in verse 23, and they're quite confident that the words that they meet are the right words to meet his approval. And they say this, he's been silent, and they're like, that's how we meant to act. So they say, send her away. She keeps crying out after us. You know, she's bothering us. She's embarrassing us. She's shaming us, this woman who's following us. Won't you send her away? She's calling out after us. The amazing thing here, she's come in humility, yet there's pride in them because never once did she want the disciples' attention. She wanted Jesus, her Lord, the Messiah's attention. But they rope themselves in with Jesus, his power and his ministry, and they say, she's bothering us. You know, we've come here to rest, we've had ministry time, it's been hard, and we need a rest, so Jesus, you send her away. Something's happening in that moment. It reminds me of another story where Jesus had the children come to him. The disciples wanted to shoo them away because they thought he was too important to give time to the kids. And he addressed them in that moment. But it doesn't happen here. Here's the second part of the exam that comes out. They say, send her away. So Jesus says, they're saying, so here he's walking, she's calling out, the disciples see him being silent, and they say, that's right, actually, why don't you send her away? And Jesus responds to them, not to her, this is his response to them, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. It seems like he's even backing them. It seems like he's saying, I'm not even going to engage with her to send her away because I'm a man on a mission. I've been sent to the lost sheep of Israel, to the Israelites. And you think, why does he say this? When we know that his heart is for the whole world, for God so loved the world that he came, that his desire that none should perish. What's happening here? There's something deeper that's unfolding, because good teachers don't just give lectures, but they invite us into an experience. And that's what Jesus is doing here with the disciples and with this lady. So he's in this place, and he's not addressing their negative attitudes. We'd expect that. He's done that before with the children. It didn't shift them. So he's coming at a different angle this time round, where he's wanting to actually bring them into this experience. And Jesus seems to be agreeing with them. And it looks like he's backing them. Of course I'll get rid of her. This person is not an Israelite. It's just a Gentile. It's just the woman. It's just the riffraff of society. I'll send her away. But notice this. He doesn't send her away. And his attention is still focused on the disciples. And he's wondering, in the midst of this moment, have any of you encountered who I am and know who I am? Have you touched the Father's heart in me? Have you understood that I'm one that touches the needy and the broken, the outcast, that I bring dignity and honor, I bring compassion and love, I bring mercy and grace? Have you realized who I am and the culture that I carry, the very culture of heaven? Have you realized that? Or are you still bought into the regimes of the day? That's what's going on in this moment. That's what Jesus is wondering as he's watching the disciples, as he's agreeing supposedly with what they're saying. But here the woman goes through the part 2 of her test, and she's hearing what Jesus is saying. And Jesus is talking to and facing his disciples, and the word that she hears as he's been silent, as he's not focused on her, she hears this, that he's only called to the lost sheep of Israel. You're an outsider. You're not one of the in-crew. You're not part of my mission. I don't have time to serve you and to meet your need. And there's this question, what does she do in this moment as she hears this coming at her? She hasn't moved away because of silence. Is she going to move away from feeling that she's on the outside, that she's not actually part of his mission? But here's what's going on in her heart. Her concern for her child is so strong. Her confidence in Jesus' compassion and power is so fully persuaded. She's in this place where she's going to persevere even in her petition, because she knows that even though he seems unwilling, she knows something about who he is and what he carries and what he's about and what she's believed. And she's saying, I'm going to keep pushing in. No matter if he seems silent, no matter if he seems to say I'm not his mission, I'm going to keep pushing in. It's that moment kind of like Jacob, where no, I'm going to wrestle. I'm not walking away this time. I'm not giving up. I'm going to hold on. I'm going to hold on to you till you bless me. And this is happening in her heart. She's got nowhere else to go. She's been ignored. He's focused on the disciples. She's been called outside of his mission. And so she kneels on the ground in a posture of reverence and humility. Verse 25. The woman came and knelt before him, and she uttered a single phrase, a cry from her heart, Lord, help me. It's the second time she's calling him Lord. Lord, help me. And the disciples are watching, and Jesus is watching them. And there's a tension building within them, because they know what Jesus said is what they would have said. But their theology tells them this is right, that she is to be shunned and rejected and ignored and turned away. But something is happening inside of them. Something is in motion where they realize, but this is the cry of a desperate mother on behalf of her child who is in agony and torment. And something doesn't match up here. And something's moving within them in their thought pattern that they're starting to wonder, could it possibly be that God is better and bigger than my theology? Could it possibly be that his grace and his mercy, his goodness and his love cannot be contained by my mind and regimes and organizational structures? Could it be that the God of the universe, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who reveals himself as a loving Father, who sent his Son to us, to the world because of his love, actually means it, and we're not going to constrain him? Could this be? And something shifting in them. Doesn't take total root yet, but a seed has been planted that in the book of Acts we're going to see unfold, where we see that Peter sees the Holy Spirit fall on a Gentile named Cornelius, and he starts to realize that God has no favorites, except for Julian, who always tells us that he's God's. We're all God's favorites. Every nation, every tribe, every people group, every color, every creed, every gender, every class is accepted in the beloved. It's accepted in Jesus. We are one new man in him. And so they're going to realize that, but they haven't got there yet. And he's been speaking to the disciples. That's the dynamic that I'm wanting us to catch, is he's speaking to the disciples even as she's there. And the picture is that he's looking at the disciples when he takes it further. He wants to continue just to provoke them in this religious culture and context that they're in their own mindset. So he takes it even a step further, and he says in verse 26, it is not right. He's looking at the Israelites, these disciples of his, and he says to them, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. What he's saying is, it's not right to take the healing and the salvation and the wholeness and the deliverance and the liberty and all that is meant for you, disciples and the people of Israel, and to throw it to the dogs, these Gentiles, these outsiders and this lady. Can you imagine how offensive that sounds? You know, in their minds, the disciples are saying, this is right. Everything you're saying makes sense theologically. But Jesus in this moment, looking at his disciples saying this while she's kneeling, calling out for her daughter, Jesus is forcing the disciples to have to face themselves. There's nowhere to hide in this moment. He's in effect saying, do you want me to get rid of this woman? You want me to limit my ministry just to Israel? I'm going to do what you ask, but you listen to her. You hear her cries for her daughter. And he starts to give voice to their own theology. It sounded good when they were gathered with the other Israelites and the other religious people and the other men. But it's not sounding so good to them now to hear their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions not being hidden, but spoken out in the open in front of a human being in need. Yeah. Suddenly their theology and what they believe isn't sounding so good to them in that moment. There's a ring of ugliness to it. And Jesus is saying this, and he's wondering who's going to stand up. Where's the man and the woman of God? Where's the man in this situation that's going to be counterculture and bring in the culture of heaven? Where's the man that carries my heart? But the disciples don't step into that on this day. There's going to be more opportunities to prove and improve in their degree of love. But it doesn't happen on this day. But here's the challenge to you and to me. Love one another as I've loved you. How are you doing in your releasing of love? In your living out love? Is there somebody in your life that maybe it's been hard to love, that you haven't been able to authentically and in a Christ-like fashion love? Maybe it's a parent. I love you, Mom, sitting in the front row. Maybe it's a child. I receive that love. Maybe it's somebody at work. Maybe it's somebody at church, don't look around. But maybe there's been this thing where maybe it's a group of people. We live in a nation. Where love has been defined on a surface level, without people looking a little bit deeper. And we need to pray and trust that God will give us eyes to see a little bit deeper, a little bit beyond regions. A little bit beyond a name of where a person's from, or their dialect, or their accent, or their color of their skin. We need to look a little bit deeper. The challenge is, are we learning how to love, to speak and act with compassion and truth and courage that brings liberty to others, that brings freedom to others to be who they're called to be, that sets others up to come into destiny and fullness, rather than seeing how we can just protect who we are in our little space and place. What Jesus is modeling and examining in their hearts is, are they learning how to love? I've shared with you before of a man who had a vision, or was a pastor who had a vision of heaven, and in it he saw people in these lines approaching the gates to be accepted, and Jesus was in there loving and greeting and asking them each something, and he kept wondering, what's he asking? Now it's a vision, it's not theology, but I trust the question will provoke something. It's a great question. Eventually he got up to where Jesus was, and Jesus whispered in his ear, just this simple question: have you learned how to love? For God so loved the world that he sent his son. And his son wants to ask you and me, have we learned how to love? But God says it shifted him in his ministry and how he did life after that point. That's the one test. But the other thing that's being tested here, and I'm finishing with this, is endurance. You know, he's used hard language, Jesus, at this moment. He's used about dogs, language of dogs, to force the disciples to have to face themselves. He's given voice to what they've been thinking privately, and he's done it publicly. And Jesus is doing this, and he's testing the Canaanite woman's endurance. The same breath that he said, spoken of dogs to the disciples, and dogs in that context had they were despised because they were seen as those that just were scavengers that ran around. They weren't an animal to be celebrated. But here, that's what it's talking about. A fully-fledged scavenger dog would be one to him. But when he says this, even though he's wanting to jolt the disciples, he wants to, in a little way, soften it for this lady. And he uses the diminutive of that word dog, which actually means like a whelp or a puppy. That's how it's not much softening from my perspective. But anyway, it's a little bit of softening. And he says this, and you see her here. And this has probably been the hardest part of the test for her. And you're wondering, will she run away? She could decide, this isn't worth the effort. I've called you Lord. I've called you Son of David. I'd heard about you. And what I'd heard of your reputation was kindness and tenderness and compassion. But this is not what I'm finding. This would have been a valid point, this third point, for her to walk away. But there's something still of her love for her daughter, which is so intense. There's something still of her trust in Jesus' power to heal that is so fully persuaded, so much so of her trust in Jesus' compassion that it's so deep that there's still more for her. And there's this commitment to say, no, I'm going to continue to serve Jesus as Lord and Master, and that I'm not going to give up. In verse 27, this is her response. She says, yes, Lord. I love this because this would have crushed a lesser person. But you see this, she's still expecting more from Jesus. The quietness, the saying, you're not my mission, the referring to even a dog hasn't pushed her away from what she believes in terms of who he is and what he carries. And there's something of even a playfulness that emerges in her response to him because it should have been derogatory. But she's saying, no, I know who you are. I'm not going to be pushed away by this little moment that's happening. I see beyond this. I know who you are. I've heard about you. There's faith in my heart. I know that there's grace and love, even though I haven't been able to feel the expression yet. And she says, yes, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. What she's saying to Jesus is, the bread might not be for me, might be for the children of Israel, but I don't need the bread because I just need a crumb, because just a crumb, just a portion, just a smidgen of who you are is more than sufficient, more than enough to heal, to deliver, to set me free, to bring my daughter out of pain and set her into destiny. What's happening in that moment with the disciples? And she's playful because she changes that phrase and she says, even though I'm like a puppy, even a crumb will be enough. I don't need to be a dog that gets the bread. A crumb's enough. And you can feel that in the disciples, there must have been a shift at that moment. Have you ever been at the dinner table when little Minnie, my dog, just wants a sliver of the fat? And when Leanne's not watching, not because the food isn't wonderful, just because of the dog. You just, a little smidgen. The disciples are probably thinking, you know what? You can give just a crumb. Just a crumb. And they're seeing something modeled in this lady of grit, of grace, of faith that is shifting them. And she won't give up. She's pressing through. They never came into the fullness of the love test, but she's excelling at this endurance test. And maybe you're here today and you face some difficulty. Maybe you've been needing to find relief. Maybe you've been praying. You've knelt down. Maybe you've fasted and it seems like God hasn't responded. He's been a little bit silent. Maybe you felt like you're not as focused, you're not in the mission. Maybe you felt that he's actually referred to you in a way or treated you in a way that you feel, well, this is not how I should be treated. That's a little bit derogatory in terms of this situation. Maybe you felt a bit of pushback. Maybe you're in that place. And the question is, will you keep going even when you don't know why, even when you haven't had the relief, even when you haven't had the answer, even when you haven't felt the breakthrough that you expected to come? Will you keep saying, my Lord? My Lord, will you still keep calling out to him? Will you trust that he is good even beyond all of that? Because I love this in Jesus' heart. This must have been going on. Psalm 86 says, and it talks about the cry of help. When someone cries out for help, it says that he is merciful and loving. He is always patient, always kind, always faithful, that he wants to turn and have mercy on them, to strengthen them and save them. That's what Jesus' heart is. That's what she's believing, even through this. And God prizes this endurance in a man or woman of God. It's actually called steadfastness and perseverance in other translations. And it's the Greek word hupomone. You've heard me mention it before. It means whether it's good or it's bad, whether it's up or it's down, whether it's hot or there's hindrance or there's pressure or there's things coming in you. As a man and woman of God, you're going to endure, you're going to be steadfast, you're going to persevere, because here is the thing, it's not a passive acceptance, it's a victorious endurance, knowing that I'm going to keep hanging on to who He is, because He is going to come through for me, because I know He's good. And even though it might seem delayed, He's always on time. And it's beautiful in His time. So the disciples are watching, and they are thinking, what just happened? This Gentile woman who is spiritually at the bottom of the barrel from our perspective has just showed us up. But let me tell you, they're loving it. They're watching with their mouths open. They've never seen anyone with such confidence keep on pursuing and holding on to Jesus, just following Him and expressing love even when it seems like she's not getting it. And this woman, even in the midst of that, is relating to Jesus on a level of understanding and humility and reverence and trust and boldness that is provoking something in their hearts. And finally, Jesus turns to face this woman. She's been crying out for the Lord, the Son of David. He knows who He is, but He's had to hide that for a moment for the purpose to be fulfilled. But now He gets to lavish and to open up His love upon her. And He says this, then Jesus answered her, "Woman, your faith," in the Amplified, you've got to amplify it a bit when you read it. "Woman, your faith, your personal trust and confidence in my power is great." It's the word mega. He's saying you've got mega faith. It's only mentioned twice in Matthew. The other time was with a Gentile centurion as well, just for the disciples to catch up a little bit. Mega faith, and it will be done for you as you so desire. Jesus just turns. The moment has come. He gets to unfold His goodness. He gets to unfold who He is. He gets to bring everything she's been calling out for. And this is how the commentary puts it, and I want you to get it. See, this is why He was able to go through this with her, because He'll never take us through something we cannot bear. He's testing us to prove us and to improve us, never to shipwreck us. This is what the commentary expresses of His heart towards her. He knew what was in her heart. He knew the strength of her faith. He knew how well able she was by His grace to break through such discouragements, that the test of her faith might be unto praise and honor and glory of God and into her breakthrough and destiny. See, He was never unsure. You didn't get as excited about that as you should have. I will keep you here for a little bit longer. I'm going to reread that. You need to respond properly if you want to go home. There's a test of endurance here. I'm going to say this again because I want you to hear it, because you might be in it. He knew what was in her heart. Don't miss the beauty of Jesus in this. He knew what was in her heart. He knew the strength of her faith. He was never trying to prove her faith to Himself. He was trying to prove it to her and to those around. And how well able she was by His grace. Just because you feel you can't see His face doesn't mean His grace is at work in your life. To break through such discouragements. That the testing of her faith, we need to go through that. We can read it in James, chapter 1 if you need to. Might be unto His praise and honor and glory for her breakthrough and for her destiny. This is setting her into destiny. Here's the key for you. And also from the commentary, the state of one's heart, shaped by faith, is the decisive factor. You want to know what the decisive factor is for your breakthrough and what you've been enduring? Here it is. The state of your heart, the humility with which she came, the reverence, the commitment, the being fully persuaded, the believing on His character and His nature, the perseverance not to get pushed away, to push in. The state of her heart, which was wrapped in faith, was the decisive factor for her to receive the desires of her heart. Isn't that beautiful? I want to pray for us at this point, if we can stand.